So first of all, well, thanks everyone for joining, and welcome to this HDF User Group meeting on plugins and data compression. So I'm David Pennicard. I'm the local organizer here at DESY. So I think all of us face this kind of double problem with our data, where on the one hand we have increasing volumes of data to deal with, but at the same time, we also want to make the data more useful to people, for example, with better metadata or making it more interoperable with different software and so on. So I think combining a discussion of the HDF5 file format with plugins and data compression should hopefully be useful to a lot of us. So to begin with, I'd like to talk a bit about the organizational details for the meeting before handing over to Gert to say a little more about the scientific goals and so on of the meeting. So first of all, I'd like to sort of introduce the organizing committee. So we have Andy Goetz from ESRF as the general chair of the meeting. We have Thomas Van Sand from ESRF and Dana Robinson from the HDF group as technical program chairs. We have Gert here as the executive director of the HDF group, and also Laurie Cooper has been working on communications. Now, the meeting's also sponsored by an EU project called LEAPS Innov, so basically you can thank them for coffee. So LEAPS is an organization, the League of European Accelerator-Based Photon Sources. So it's a collaboration of various, largely synchrotron and FEL labs in Europe. And this particular project, LEAPS Innov, is an EU-funded project with work packages working in various areas of technical development and also improving collaboration with industry. And one of the work packages is on data reduction, which of course ties in with this meeting. So I'd like to say also a few words of introduction about what we do at DESY. So DESY was founded a bit more than 60 years ago, and it's a government-funded national research lab with research in a variety of different areas. So DESY is predominantly an accelerator lab. We both do accelerator R&D into new accelerator technologies and also build large accelerators used in a variety of different scientific fields. These days, there's a big effort in photon science. So on the map here, we have a few large X-ray facilities on site. So the Petra 3 synchrotron, which we'll have a guided tour of later in the week. We also have the Flash soft X-ray free electron laser, and also the accelerator for the European XFEL, though the European XFEL is a separate organization, and so the experimental stations and so on aren't part of DESY. We also have a long history in particle physics. So a number of the accelerators you see in this diagram were previously used for particle physics. And as the need for bigger and bigger accelerators has grown in particle physics, these days DESY is mostly contributing to experiments such as the LHC at CERN. There's also another DESY site in Zeuthen near Berlin who specialize particularly in astroparticle physics. On top of that, we have quite a variety of different institutes on site, including using our facilities. So we have various groups in the University of Hamburg, Max Planck groups, the European Molecular Biology Lab, Hereon, which is another German institute focusing more on material science, and so forth. So we have quite a variety of people on campus. So briefly getting into the timetable, today and Wednesday morning will mostly be presentations from people on different areas of work, though we want to leave a good amount of time for discussion after the talks for Q&A. Then on Wednesday afternoon, we have a more substantial time for discussion about next steps with plugins in HDF5. Then on Thursday, we have a number of tutorials. One thing I should say on that front is that the tutorials, you have the opportunity to follow along on your own computers. I'll put information on the Indico page about what sort of requirements would be needed to follow along in terms of maybe what Python versions you need and so forth. And there'll also be a tour available on Thursday. So the details of the schedule are available on the Indico page. So presentations are typically 30 minutes, about 20 minutes talk, 10 minutes discussion. We have coffee breaks mid-morning and mid-afternoon, and also coffee available back in the foyer after lunch. And then lunch, self-paid, will be at the DESY canteen, which is basically a couple of minutes that direction. So I'll show you when it comes to lunch break. When it comes to people giving presentations, it would be best if you can either upload slides to Indico, email me, or come to put the slides in this computer, basically so that we can get the audio in the room and the Zoom working together well. And then we have some remote participants who'll be presenting over Zoom as well. Also, yes, one question is whether or not you want your slides to be shared. So if you want them to be shared, you can either upload them to Indico or tell me when you email them that you want them to be shared. Otherwise, let me know and we can just, have them on this computer and then delete them afterwards. We would also like to record presentations with permission and put them on the HDF Group YouTube channel. Now, we would only do this after you sign a consent form to it. So I've got a stack of forms here that I'll, ask people after they've given their presentations. Lastly, we do have a restaurant trip this evening starting at 6 to a Portuguese restaurant in the Hamburg Harbour area, Ola Lisboa. So that's also self-paid, and there's some information there. Now, in terms of organization, everyone who's requested, either by email or during the registration to join is booked up. If there are other people here now who want to join, I can certainly call the restaurant and see if they have any extra seats. So, no promises, but we can give it a go. The booking I had to get the place, I had to book somewhat early. So our session will be finishing at 4:45, just to be on the safe side if there are any travel problems. And then we'll be leaving from the foyer 10 minutes after we finish for the booking. So we'll be getting there by public transport, but if you don't have a ticket, you can buy one when we catch the bus. So this is in the Hamburg Harbour area, so it's also quite a nice area for a look around after the meal as well. And finally, like I said, we're having a tour of the Petra synchrotron on Thursday mid-afternoon. So I'll have a sign-up sheet here for anyone who wants to join so that we know the numbers and so forth. So yeah, once again, thanks for joining. And if you have any difficulties about anything, just ask me, or you can also drop me an email at davidpennicard@desy.de. So now I'd like to hand over to Gert for a moment.
Okay. Well, thanks for the introduction. And well, first of all, let me thank David and Daisy for hosting us here at this nice facility. And yeah, so I forgot to start my timer because I don't want to keep us on track. Yeah, so this is the discussion that we hope to begin here today and over the following days is pretty much about well, you can look at it at different levels of generality, but it has to do eventually with reproducibility. I mean, there are huge sums of money going into the acquisition of experimental data, running long simulations and all the rest of it, involving compression, among many other things. And although we will focus here mostly on compression and filters and things like that. Many of you probably know that there are many other ways how you can extend the HDF5 library with virtual file drivers and wall plugins and all the rest of it. So this is not a new theme. And in fact, going back, I think there was an effort around 2014 as part of the Research Data Alliance that, to my knowledge, I don't know where that went, or obviously it didn't do the job at the time, or it just didn't get off the ground. Dr. Eugen Wintersberger was here at DESY, and I think there was a first RDA meeting where this was sort of raised as an issue. What is going to happen? What assumptions can people make? The community as a whole, but the synchrotron, the light source community, sort of in the lead. How can we ensure that data that has dependencies on compression methods and so forth, that in decades from now, people can rely on having access to this data, being able to reproduce the data as recorded. And I don't know why that didn't go anywhere or didn't find any traction, but now, almost 10 years later, we are not exactly back to square one, but the underlying fundamental problem is the same, although I would argue that technically we are in a much better position now. I mean, Dana just the other day reminded me, the HDF group switched to GitHub about 2 years ago. Hard to believe. I thought we'd been on GitHub for much longer. But and of course, platforms like that, and the whole continuous development, continuous integration, all these capabilities didn't exist in that form 10 years ago and were that easily accessible. And I think, so on the technical side, I think there are many more possibilities today, but then of course, certain social issues or other issues remain, such as we see that all the time, although we have this registration mechanism for identifiers, for example, for compression filters. That's probably a little outdated, and sort of on the technical side, I'm sure we'll figure out something better. But then if you think about reproducibility, for example, there are sort of multiple things connected here. The immediate sort of what you might call the plugin, but then the author of that compression method, whether it's LZ4 or ZFP or whatever, that person may or may not be connected at all to the maintainer that maintains that piece that glues it to the H5Z callback API that eventually calls the compression method. And then different platforms, different compilers, different distributions. And we've seen it many times back in 2014, and that hasn't changed. Sometimes authors, whether they are the authors of that plugin or whether they are the authors of the original compression method, they just disappear. I mean, they get on with their lives and there's nothing wrong with that. But of course, puts potentially large data collections that relied at when the data was acquired on that particular method in jeopardy, potentially. And it's really, for us as HDF group, we are a very small organization, so we are about 25 people at this point. We got plenty of things to do, and we definitely want to be part of the solution to this problem. And we want to be helpful, but of course, we cannot sort of take on the whole responsibility, and there's a long responsibility chain here, and we will start the discussion this afternoon looking at, well, who are the in management stakeholders in management speak, or the participants in that conversation. But then I think we also have from the very beginning to think about, this is not just a technical problem, it is a problem of governance, and RDA, I think, was maybe from a governance perspective, a good starting point. And maybe there are people here that I'm personally not involved with RDA at this point, but I think I definitely want to engage. And but then we also have to think about resources. I think it makes sense to share resources, not just development resources, but also formulate, and that was actually part of Eugen's effort in 2014 to define what are the expectations for the code, for the build system, for the validation and verification tests and test files and things like that. So there's a whole range of issues. So there is the governance from a policy perspective to then also see, well, how do we get a hold of these resources? Who at the end of the day pays for them? And there are a lot of free resources out there, but then there are always last mile problems or things that need to be, whether we go to foundations or to the EU or whoever, that policy group will determine that. And then, yes, there are lots of technical problems, but I mean, you guys probably can confirm that the technical problems are typically not the hardest problems. It's really the social problems, the governance problems, the policy and all the rest of it. And then of course, this needs to be driven by science, by what people really need. And, but I think with organizations like this and the participants from light sources and other communities. So obviously this is not a problem specific to light sources. I mean, it happens in biomedical imaging and also in the, I think it's very important to not forget users out there in industry, third parties that have that support HDF5 in their tool stacks and so forth, that we sort of build this wider coalition. And so I'm just rambling here. I'm excited that we have this discussion starting this afternoon. And before we go there, we have some technical presentations. But I think, yeah, making this a strong community effort, I think, will maybe give it a greater chance of success the second time around. Please.
Now or during discussion?
Well, we can.
Yes, if it's reasonably short.
Yeah, it is short. So essentially, I was at that meeting and I worked with Eugen on this. And as a result, HDF Group created a repository of most commonly used filters, and those are built and tested with every release. And at that time, it was like, okay, problem is solved because everyone had and everyone knew where to find. Until Earth Science community, and I hope Ed is it? So he will be here, he will be talking. They have different repository of different filters. And now there are two, and maybe there are more floating around of those repositories. So this one problem, which repository for the user, I would not worry much about the filters themselves, because when they're registered, if you're doing it right, there should be references, it will be left to discussion. But also, is the real problem? So far we didn't see that, oh, I have data and I cannot read it because I don't know the filter. It still may happen, but let's solve real problems. So I think we should define what the problem is, set governance, but nothing prevents other people organize, like Eugen and I thought, okay, we'll have a repository, it's pretty visible, and suddenly Earth Science people have different repository. So now communities use different.
Thanks.